Good afternoon, Conway Cougars. It's Miss Cunningham and
Michael.
Back again to read chapter 21 of Small Spaces. Yesterday we left off with Ollie, Coco, and Brian, who managed to get up in the barn away from all the scarecrows. We found out that the scarecrows cannot climb, thank goodness. So here we go, chapter 21. When Coco woke up, it was morning. Ollie glanced down at the space beneath them first. The scarecrows were still there, but the life was gone from them. They were only a mass of straw dolls. Ollie glanced at her watch. The countdown had resumed. 6 hours, 13 minutes, and 21 seconds. Maze. Brian sat up groaningly. "Are they gone?" he asked. "No," said Ollie. "They're down there." All peered over the edge and shuddered. "How are we supposed to get down?" Coco asked. For, of course, the ladder was broken. "We could jump down," said Brian unenthusiastically. "Maybe the scarecrows would break our falls." "Or they wouldn't and we could break our ankles," said Coco. "We can't just sit up here forever," said Ollie. "Fine," said Brian shortly. "You jump first." "Hush! Hear that?" Coco said. Ollie and Brian fell silent. Rub, creak. It sounded like the slow feet right overhead, and they all froze.
The smiling man.
Then suddenly Ollie laughed. She stood up. "No scarecrows this time," she said. "A branch rubbing the roof. And that means a tree, which means a way down. The roof tiles are all rotten." She began scraping at the roof from the inside. Wormy wood rained down around her. "Come on, help me." Together they made a hole big enough to boost Coco's head through. "A tree branch," cried Coco. "Ollie, you were right. Here." She grabbed something they couldn't see and struggled out, kicking. "It's fine," said Coco, muffled overhead. "You just have to climb carefully." "How is she the clumsiest person ever on the ground, yet a squirrel when she's climbing?" muttered Ollie. Brian grinned. "You're kind of grumpy most of the time, but when things get bad, you're the bravest. People can surprise you, Ollie Pop." Without another word, he turned away and began making the hole in the roof bigger. Ollie found herself smiling. "Yeah. Sometimes even hockey stars read books," she said. "Sometimes," said Brian, and he smiled back. "You're next." Ollie hoisted her backpack and let him push her out of the hole in the roof. She found herself high above the world, looking around a huge rustling field of corn. There seemed to be a dark lump in the center of the field, but she couldn't tell what it was. Ollie waited to be scared. Waited to be scared sick of the height, but she wasn't. Coco had used the branch rubbing on the barn roof like a bridge, and now she was watching anxiously from the fork of the big oak tree. "Come on, Ollie," she called. Behind her, Brian said, "Come on, Ollie, it's not that high." And Olivia Adler, without hesitation, crawled across the branch and began climbing down the tree. In a few minutes, they were all on the ground and flushed with success. The corn stalks hissed together. They were taller than Brian's head. Scarecrows stood in the corn. The trio caught glimpses of bright shirts and checkered shirts. None of them really wanted to go in the field. "Well," said Ollie, "either we wait for the scarecrows to come back tonight and every night until they get us, or we starve. We can go into the corn." "We can't leave without the others," said Brian. "Once you leave Narnia, you can't get back in the same way." Ollie nodded. "If anyone is going to save them, it has to be us." She raised her watch. "Maze," it said. "The answer has to be there." "Fine," said Coco, looking unhappily at the corn. "Fine." They were like swimmers about to jump into icy waters, and no one wanted to go first. "Let's go," said Ollie. She reached out her hands, and Brian and Coco took them. The three stepped into the corn. The path was narrow, and they switched to a single file. Ollie went first, then Coco, then Brian. Their feet squelched in the mud. Such big stalks. The corn looked like it could swallow the gray sky, much less 3 wondering kids. They were all walking down a row. Ollie could barely hear her footsteps. Couldn't hear Brian or Coco's. The corn rustled too loudly. Dead stalks rubbing together. The row ended. Ollie looked up at a huge wall of corn. They could turn left or right. "Okay," said Ollie. "It's definitely a corn maze. We have to get to the center. Any ideas?" Ollie had loved corn mazes when she was small. Left then right, squealing in fake terror, mud flying as she ran, and then finally figuring it out, getting to the center, laughing, her father picking her up, saying, "Way to go, Ollie Pop. No maze can stop you." But this was different. This was cold, huge, and scary. Guys, said Ollie, turning. Coco and Brian were gone. Winds whispered in the corn stalks. Guys, silence. Ani began to backtrack. Coco, she called. Brian? Ollie could see only one set of footsteps, only hers, the print of her rain boots. Where had they gone? For that matter, where was the way they'd come in? For now, another wall of corn rose in front of her, and she couldn't see the house or the barn. How was that possible? They walked straight in, not turning. But now there were walls on two sides, and Coco and Brian weren't there. Ollie felt close to a panic. She spun, headed the other direction, deeper in the corn. Shh! Went the stalks all around. Ollie thought she saw a dark shape up ahead. She ran calling, Brian! But it was only a scarecrow with a yellow backpack stalked upright, looking out over the field with sightless eyes. There was no other sound but the hissing corn and the whine of Ollie's own breathing. What if something had taken the others, just sneaked up through the corn and dragged them away? Something worse than scarecrows? The smiling man. Maybe he was watching her now. Coco, Ollie called again. Brian, someone yelled, Ollie, Ollie. Ollie spun. Coco, Ollie, the voice called again. Ollie began to run, calling her friends' names. She came to the place where the path split, left or right, rustling in the corn. Was that something coming up behind her? Ollie chose the direction of the random left and took off running. Her backpack thumped her back. Brian! Coco! The corn rattled. The sky blurred. Ollie passed a scarecrow, then another. Furiously, she kicked the last one down so that it lay still in the mud, looking up at the sky with its empty, smiley face. Ollie was in a panic. By then, alone, sobbing for air, stuck in the maze. She could never get out, and all around her were scarecrows.
Oh, no.
With their snatching rake hands, just waiting for the night to grab her and put her on a stake and make her a scarecrow forever. Then Ollie put her foot in a hole, tripped, and came down hard. She could taste the salt in her tears. She lay at the moment in the icy mud, crying. She was lost in a monster's stupid corn maze, and she was all alone. She wasn't going to get out, not before dark. What would her dad do when she never came back? There was a sound coming from underneath her, a sound different from the sound of the wind in the corn. It took Ollie a moment to understand. One arm was stuck beneath her, the arm that wore her mother's watch. The watch was beeping softly and steadily, like a heartbeat, like something calm. Don't panic, Ollie's mom had always told her. That's the first rule of survival, never panic. Ollie took a deep breath. That was probably what the smiling man wanted, for her to wear herself out running and being scared. Ollie sat up and she stood. Her jeans were covered in cold, sticky mud. I'm not scared, Ollie said. I'm not. I'm going to find the center, and I'm getting out of here. We all are. She looked at her watch. The text readout was gone. In its place was a digital compass. Mom, Ollie whispered. Mom, if you're there, please. No answer. Please what? Ollie thought, mad at herself. Please answer. Please drift out of the corn. A ghost. Please don't be dead. The watch buzzed softly against Ollie's wrist. The readout showed a compass needle, but instead of the normal north, south, east, west directions, there were only two. There was an I where the north should be. There was an O where the south should be. Ollie thought for a minute and then she understood. In the maze or out? Maybe out was safer, no scarecrows. But in was finding Brian and Coco. In was maybe saving everyone. In was being brave. Like her mom had been brave, always, always. Her mom was the bravest person Ollie had ever met. Ollie could be brave. Her mom was helping her, she was. Ollie swung around until the inn lined up in the path. Show me, she whispered. All right, guys. That's the end of chapter 21.